The air in the Spire of Kotar was dead. Not merely still, but anciently, perfectly dead. It hadn't moved in a millennium, and it carried the dry, sterile scent of dust that had forgotten what it was to dance in a sunbeam. My boots, soled with whisper felt, made no sound on the obsidian floors. My gear, a lifetime's worth of custom-forged perfection, didn't so much as sigh against the synth silk of my suit. I was a ghost in this treasure house, and by any god that might be sleeping here, I was the best ghost money could never buy. My lightstick cut a precise cone through the gloom, illuminating wonders that would have made a king weep. Heaps of gems like crystallized starlight, gilded statues whose faces were etched with a serene, unnerving disinterest, tapestries woven from metal threads depicting star charts of unknown constellations. Amateurs would be paralyzed by the wealth, tripping over themselves to grab the shiniest baubles. That's why they get caught. My target was singular, the heart of Kotar, a gravity gem said to hold the mass of a small moon within its fist-sized lattice, the score of a lifetime. Rin was my eyes and ears on the outside, a whisper on the comms, my tether to the world of noise and life. Anything on the external sensors, Ren. I subvocalized, the vibration in my throat feeling like a shout in the profound quiet. A pause, then his voice, tinny and distant in my inner ear receiver. Clean as a vacuum, Kale. The energy readings are flatline. Whatever god built this place isn't just sleeping, it's comatose. A smile ghosted my lips. Of course it was. My research was flawless, my entry vector a work of art. I'd rappelled from the spire's needle-like peak, slicing through a 1,000-year-old crystalline window with a sonic dissolver no louder than a cat's purr. This wasn't a job, it was a coronation. I drifted past a pedestal laden with rough, uncut soul diamonds, each bigger than my head. Child's play. They were a distraction, too crude, too obvious. The real prize, the heart, would be in the central reliquary. My path was blocked by a cluttered plinth, an afterthought of riches. Upon it sat a flawless, egg-shaped emerald, the viridian tear, mentioned in the less reliable histories. Probably worth enough to buy a small continent. Carelessly, almost dismissively, I nudged it with the back of my gloved hand to clear a path. My confidence was a star, burning hot and bright. The emerald was heavier than I expected. It tilted, rolled, and toppled from its velvet cushion. Time seemed to slow. My blood ran cold. A mistake. My first. My last? But the carpet below was a thick, dust-choked relic woven from the fleece of some extinct beast. The gem landed with a soft, dull thump that was utterly absorbed by the fabric. No crash, no shatter, not even a whisper of sound. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding, a low chuckle vibrating in my chest. Even my mistakes here were perfect. The spire was mine. Everything all right in there, Kale? Rin's voice was laced with a phantom static. My suit's audio sensor just spiked on a null frequency. Strange. Just admiring the view, I murmured, my gaze fixed on the emerald, safe in the plush carpet. I turned my head to look through the massive vaulted window towards the opposite peak where Rin was stationed, a tiny black speck against the alien sky. Had a close call, but we're golden. This place is a pushover. And then I saw it. I saw it, but didn't understand it. Rin's black-clad form was outlined by the dim starlight. Behind him, the empty air rippled. It wasn't a creature, not a ship, not anything. It was like a pocket of the darkness detached itself and moved. There was no sound, no flash of light. Rin's body just vanished. He didn't fall, he didn't scream. He was there, a familiar silhouette against the stars, and then he was gone, erased. My comlink crackled with a sound I had never heard before. The sound of absolute, instantaneous silence. Rin was gone, and I, in my perfect, silent tomb, was alone. The chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the temperature. My overconfidence, my hot, bright star, had just collapsed into a black hole of terror. Shock is a physical thing. It's a bucket of ice water poured directly onto the brain, turning coherent thought to slush. Rin was gone. Not killed, not taken. The word my mind kept spitting out was deleted. One moment, matter and memory. The next, a void against the stars. My professionalism, my meticulously constructed shell of calm, fractured into 1,000 pieces. I stood frozen in the grand reliquary, the cone of my light stick trembling, painting frantic, dancing circles on the gold leaf walls. Rin? The name was a choked whisper, a puff of useless air. Of course, there was no reply. The calm was dead, the channel filled with an unnerving, perfect quiet that was 1,000 times worse than static. He was my lookout, my tether. Now the line was cut, and I was adrift in this dead sea. My training screamed at me. Abort, egress now. An unknown variable has compromised the mission. It was the only rational thought that could pierce the fog of horror. My mission parameters were simple. Get the heart and get out clean. The clean part was already a bloodbath. My partner, my only friend in this forsaken business, was gone. The heart of Kotar could turn to dust for all I cared. My body finally obeyed my brain. I took a single, small step backward, pivoting on the ball of my foot, my weight shifting with the fluid grace that had kept me alive for 20 years. My gaze was still locked on the empty spot on the distant spire, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes had seen. The movement was infinitely small, my whisper-felt soles kissing the obsidian floor without a sound. It should have been nothing. It was everything. The dead air in the spire came alive. It wasn't a sound or a wind. It was a change in pressure, a deep, sickening lurch that I felt in my inner ears and at the base of my skull. A thick, oppressive weight settled on the room, pushing down on my shoulders, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I froze mid-step, one foot slightly raised, a statue of pure animal terror. My lightstick's beam caught it. The dust, the thick, gray blanket of time that coated everything. On the floor, just in front of my forward foot, the dust was rippling. Not like it was blown by a breeze, but like the floor itself was a pond, and my movement was a stone dropped into it. A tiny, circular wave of disturbed dust pulsed outward from where I had shifted my weight, traveling at an impossible speed. It was followed by a second ripple, then a third. Then, from the far side of the hall, I saw an answering ripple coming back towards me. A predatory wave surging through the dust, zeroing in on my position. I held my breath, every muscle screaming. The approaching ripple was silent, but my mind filled the void with a low humming. It washed over the spot where my foot had been a moment before I took my step, then dissipated, the dust settling back into a flat, undisturbed blanket. The pressure in the air vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The hall was once again still, silent, and dead. But it wasn't dead. It was waiting. A horrifying clarity cut through my panic. The emerald, the soft thump, Rin's comm sensor spiking on a null frequency. It wasn't the sound. It was the vibration. A fist-sized gem dropped from 4 feet. A minor impact, a tiny shockwave through the floor and the structure. Enough. Whatever took Rin hadn't seen him or heard him. It had felt him, an infinitesimal tremor from 100 meters away. And my own tiny, professional, silent step had just sent out another call, a dinner bell. I lowered my foot back to the ground, a process that took an eternity. Each millimeter of descent was a negotiation with death. The air remained still. My heart was a drum machine against my ribs, each frantic beat a potential death sentence. "Run," my instincts shrieked. "Flee! Get to the window! Get out!" But I couldn't. Running would be a symphony of vibrations. Walking would be a death march. Even breathing felt like a reckless act. My hubris had led me into the perfect trap. The rules weren't about stealth or sound. The rule was stillness, and to break it was to be erased. Panic is a poor advisor, but abject terror is a masterful teacher. In minutes, it taught me a new way to exist. Every involuntary twitch of a muscle, every swallow, every shift of my own weight felt like a scream in this silent world. The Spire was no longer a vault of treasures to be plundered. It was a mausoleum waiting for a new resident. My only objective, the singular burning thought that superseded all others, was escape. The window I'd entered through felt a galaxy away, though it was perhaps 60 meters back the way I'd come. Moving was agony. I adopted a technique born of pure desperation, a predator's crawl learned in reverse. I wouldn't lift my feet. I would slide them, distributing my weight as evenly as I could, making the friction with the dusty floor a slow, continuous event rather than a series of distinct impacts. Each slide was a universe of time. I would push my foot forward a centimeter, pause for a full minute, listening with my skin for any change in the air pressure, watching the dust for the slightest tremor. The journey was an eternity of inches. Past the pedestals of soul diamonds, their facets catching my trembling light in 1,000 tiny, mocking glints. Past the gilded statues with their placid, knowing faces. They had watched countless ages pass in silence. My frantic, mortal struggle was less than nothing to them. The silence was a presence now. It pressed in, filling my ears, making me imagine sounds, a scuttling in the dark, a whisper behind me. It was all a lie. The only truth was vibration. After what felt like a lifetime of this glacial, torturous progress, I saw it. the faint outline of the night sky framed by the elegant arch of the crystalline window I had so arrogantly cut my way through. A ragged sigh of hope escaped my lips, a puff of air I immediately regretted. I froze, waiting. Nothing. No pressure change, no ripple in the ever-present dust. Maybe I was learning. Hope gave my movements a new, dangerous urgency. Another 30 meters, 20, 10. The entrance was right there. Freedom was a handspan away. And that's when I saw why the spire was so silent. That's when I saw the warden. Blocking the window, shimmering against the star field beyond, was a distortion. It had no color, no definite shape. It was like a column of intense heat rising off a sun-baked road, a pillar of clear, warping gelatin that bent and twisted the light passing through it. The stars behind it didn't just blur. They swam, they spiraled, they fractured into impossible geometries. It was utterly invisible until you saw what it did to the world behind it. It drifted slowly back and forth before the window, a sentinel made of nothing. I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that this was what had taken Rin. This silent, invisible predator, drawn here not by me, but by the infinitesimal vibrations of the outside world, the whisper of wind against the spire's peak, the subtle gravitational pull of the planet's rotation, the hum of deep space itself, leaking through the sealed entrance. It was feeding on the ghost of sound, and it was squarely between me and my only way out. My plan, my hope, all of it evaporated. The crawl that had taken all my focus and nerve had led me not to freedom, but to the jaws of the beast. I was trapped, utterly, completely trapped. I stared at the shimmering null space, the silent hunter, and the full weight of my situation descended. The priceless treasures surrounding me were no longer objects of desire. They were tombstones. The golden statues, the piles of jewels, the obsidian walls. This wasn't a vault. It was a cage, a gilded, magnificent, and inescapable cage. And I had willingly, arrogantly, locked myself inside with the monster. The spire had become my tomb. Hope dies hard, but when it does, the corpse leaves a chilling vacancy. With the exit guarded and the rules of my prison made horrifyingly clear, my frantic need to escape sublimated into something else. A cold, desperate need to understand. Thieves and predators have one thing in common. We study our marks. My mark was now an invisible, vibration-hunting horror, and my life depended on knowing its habits, its nature, its weaknesses. My arrogance was a distant memory, burned away by fear. Now, only the methodical, analytical part of me remained. There was no going back, only forward, deeper into the spire. I turned away from the shimmering warden at the window, a deep instinctual dread coiling in my gut, and began the agonizingly slow slide back into the treasure hall. My new destination was a vast, circular chamber I had noted from the Spire schematics, a place marked only with the glyph for knowledge or history, an archive, a library of the gods. The journey was a new kind of hell. Before, I was crawling away from an unknown horror. Now, I felt like I was crawling towards its nest. Every centimeter was a gamble. I slid my foot, paused, listened to the silence, watched the dust, and repeated the cycle over and over. The air was thick with a palpable tension. I felt watched. The feeling was a new terror, a sensation without sensory input. It was the feeling a mouse must have when the shadow of the hawk has fallen upon it, a primal knowledge of being observed by a superior predator. The archive was a breathtaking, terrifying place. It was a vast rotunda, its walls curving upwards into a dome that was lost in shadow. There were no books, no data slates. The walls themselves were the text. Every inch of stone was covered in impossibly intricate glyphs, carved with a precision that seemed beyond mortal hands. They spiraled from the floor to the ceiling, a single, continuous narrative. I risked raising my light stick, angling the beam. The glyphs were not just writing, they were reliefs, scenes carved in stone. I saw depictions of strange, formless beings seeding stars. I saw worlds born and dying. And I saw the Spire. It was shown not as a tomb or a vault, but as a cage designed to hold one thing. Following the spiraling text with my light was another risk, a tiny movement of my wrist, but I had to know. My eyes traced the story. It told of a creature born from the vacuum between worlds, a being of perfect silence that craved resonance, that fed on kinetic energy. The builders of this place, the serene-faced giants from the statues, had fought it. They couldn't destroy it, so they contained it. They built the Spire as its prison and its temple, a place of absolute stillness where it could be placated, starved. They called it the Chirovas, which my crude auto-translator rendered as the Warden of Silence. Then I came to the glyphs that turned my fear to existential nausea. A carving depicted a small, two-legged figure, a trespasser, blundering into the spire. It showed the shimmering, formless warden descending upon it. But the next panel wasn't one of death. The figure wasn't torn apart or devoured. The carving showed the warden's distortion flowing over the trespasser, and the figure dissolving into it. The final glyph was the most hideous of all. It showed the warden, now slightly larger, its shimmering form subtly changed, with a new, faint echo of the trespasser's shape swirling deep within its null space. The translation confirmed the horror. It does not kill. It subsumes. The vibration of a life is the sweetest chord. It plucks the string and adds the note to its symphony. The song grows with every soul consumed. The stolen life lends it form. The stolen mind lends it cunning. I fell back against the wall, a motion far too fast, far too reckless. A gasp escaped my throat. Ren wasn't just dead. He hadn't just been erased. He was in there. His life, his energy, his consciousness, perhaps even his memories, were now part of the monster. The warden wasn't just a simple predator. It was a collector. And it wasn't just hunting me to kill me. It was hunting me to add me to its choir. The hunter wasn't just a monster anymore. It was a living, growing monument to its victims. And a part of my friend was now looking for me through the eyes of a silent god. The knowledge from the archive changed everything. It poisoned the silence, layering a new stratum of personal dread over my already suffocating fear. I was no longer hiding from an impersonal force of nature. I was being stalked by a composite entity, a thinking predator, an expanding consciousness that had recently ingested the mind of the man who knew my tactics better than anyone. Ren and I had trained together, developed our silent signals, our fallback procedures, our emergency protocols. Did the warden now know them too? I abandoned the open halls, sliding my way into a labyrinth of smaller chambers filled with lesser artifacts. Here I could use the clutter as cover, breaking lines of sight. It felt safer, but the feeling of being watched intensified. The warden was no longer a passive trap waiting to be sprung. It was actively hunting me. Its presence was a palpable thing now. It manifested as a moving pocket of deep, unnatural cold. Not a draft, but a localized absence of heat that would drift into a room, silent and deadly, sending a chill through my suit that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. I would be pressed into an alcove behind a plinth, heart hammering a soft, terrifying rhythm against my ribs, and watch as a patch of air on the far side of the room grew frigid. The cold would crawl along the wall, flow around a statue, and then dissipate, only to reappear moments later in the adjoining corridor. It was patrolling, learning the layout, learning me. Hours, or maybe days, time had lost all meaning, bled into one another. My water was low, my nutrient paste nearly gone. Fatigue was a heavy cloak threatening to pull me under. In a moment of weakness, slumped behind a row of monolithic jade urns, I saw it more clearly than ever before. It drifted into the chamber from a high archway, its passage marked by that familiar, soul-leeching cold. This time, the light from a strange phosphorescent crystal in the ceiling caught its distortion just right. It wasn't just a shimmer. Within the heat haze warp, for a sickening fraction of a second, I saw shapes. Fleeting, translucent, and agonizingly familiar. I saw the faint outline of a four-armed creature from the glyphs, its form twisting and dissolving. I saw other beings, things I couldn't name, their anatomies a fluid nightmare. And then, for a heartbeat that will be burned into my mind forever, I saw the ghost of a human silhouette. Slender, familiar, the way Rin used to stand, with his weight shifted slightly to one side. The image was there, an echo in the distortion. Then it was churned back into the formless whole. My breath hitched. The silent sob that racked my body was a suicidal impulse. I clamped my hand over my mouth, biting down on my glove to stifle the sound. The shimmering column paused. It stopped its slow, random drift and seemed to turn. The cold intensified, focused directly on my hiding place. It knew. It didn't know exactly where I was, but it knew I was here. It had sensed that tiny internal tremor of grief. The dust on the floor between me and it began to quiver, ever so slightly. The creature was systematically exploring the room now, not with a pattern, but with an intelligent, probing patience. It flowed into one alcove, then another, getting closer. It was herding me, using my own fear against me, cutting off my escape routes, forcing me into a smaller and smaller corner of the Spire. It was no longer a simple hunt. This was a dissection. It was taking me apart piece by piece, learning my responses, enjoying my terror. The part of it that was Rin, was it the part that enjoyed this the most? The hunt was relentless. The cold presence of the warden was a constant companion, flushing me from one hiding spot to the next. It was a suffocating, slow-motion game of chess where I was down to my last pawn, and my opponent could see every move I considered before I made it. I was exhausted, dehydrated, my nerves frayed to the point of screaming. In my flight from a terrifyingly close encounter, the shimmer passing so near that the cold had fogged the outside of my helmet's visor, I stumbled, not through an archway, but through a membrane. It wasn't a door, just an opening, but the moment I slid through it, the world changed. The omnipresent, heavy silence of the spire was replaced by something else entirely. A profound, crushing deadness. The ambient hum of my suit's life support, a sound so faint I had long ago stopped noticing it, vanished. The subtle creak of my own joints, the sound of my own blood pumping in my ears, gone. It was as if I had been plunged into a vacuum deeper than space itself. All sound, all vibration ceased to exist at the threshold. The chamber was small, circular, and starkly different from the opulence outside. The walls weren't stone, but were lined with a thick, porous black material that seemed to drink the light from my stick. It was a perfect anechoic chamber, but built with a technology that defied physics. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. Here, the rules were different. The oppressive, watching presence of the warden was gone, its influence unable to penetrate these sound-devouring walls. For the first time since Rin's disappearance, I felt a flicker of something other than terror, a sliver of hope. This was a safe room, a sanctuary. In the center of the chamber, on a simple, unadorned pedestal of the same black material, rested a single object. It was a metallic tuning fork, about the length of my forearm, crafted from a lustrous, silver-gray metal I didn't recognize. Its tines were etched with spiraling glyphs, the same ancient language as the archive walls. I approached it with a reverence born of desperation. The glyphs on the pedestal were blessedly simple, a user's manual for a dying god's last tool. My translator parsed the core concepts: resonance, inversion, the still point, the unstruck chord. It described the artifact as a null field projector. When activated, it didn't just absorb sound, it generated a localized field of absolute null vibration, an ontological bubble of perfect, unassailable stillness. The glyphs promised that a user within the field would be utterly undetectable to the warden, a ghost within the ghost. This was it. Not just a hiding place, but a key, a weapon. The Spire hadn't just been a prison. Its builders had left an escape hatch, a tool for someone to defeat their ancient enemy. My confidence, a long dead and buried thing, stirred in its grave. I hadn't just stumbled into a sanctuary. I had found the solution. All my terror, my painstaking, agonizing crawls had led me here. My hubris, it seemed, hadn't been entirely misplaced after all. I had outthought the monster. I could activate this device, wrap myself in a shroud of perfect silence, and simply walk out the front door. I would stroll right past the warden, a god in my own pocket of stillness, and leave this cursed tomb behind forever. I reached out a trembling hand and wrapped my fingers around the cold, smooth metal of the tuning fork. Victory was at hand. The tuning fork felt like a scepter in my hand, heavy with promise. There was a small, pressure-sensitive rune at the base of its handle. Following the glyph's silent instructions, I pressed my thumb against it. It didn't click or buzz. The fork simply came alive, vibrating with a frequency so deep and fundamental it was beyond the range of hearing. A hum I felt in my bones and the fillings in my teeth. The air around me shimmered for a moment, and then the final, residual sensations of my own existence vanished. My body was completely, utterly still. I took a step. No tremor in my suit, no vibration through the floor. I felt my boot connect with the ground, but there was no corresponding sensory feedback. It was like walking on clouds. I waved my hand in front of my face, and the swoosh of air was absent. The bubble of null vibration, my personal cloak of invisibility, was perfect. A laugh, raw and giddy with relief, tried to tear its way out of my throat, but it died before it could make a sound, strangled by the perfect stillness. Triumph surged through me, a heady, intoxicating nectar. I had done it. I had faced the impossible, deciphered the rules, and found the one perfect counter. My professional pride, so brutally eviscerated, was reborn. I strode out of the chamber of nullity, my every step a confident, silent proclamation of my victory. The oppressive presence of the Spire returned, but it felt different now, impotent. I was an untouchable phantom. I headed directly for the main hall, for the window, my path certain. That's when the air began to grow cold. It wasn't the creeping, localized chill of the warden on patrol. This was a sudden, precipitous drop in temperature that permeated the entire hall. The golden statues became rimmed with a sudden frost. My own breath, soundlessly fogging the inside of my visor, flash froze against the glass. The cold was a physical weight, pressing in on my bubble of stillness from all directions at once. My triumphant stride faltered. I looked around wildly. It was then that I saw the shimmer. It wasn't in one place, it was everywhere. Distortions bloomed in the archways, poured down from the vaulted ceiling like silent waterfalls, and rose from the obsidian floor like heat haze from hell. The warden was no longer a single localized entity. It was the entire Spire, its form distended, its presence focused entirely, irresistibly on me. And I finally understood the terrifying flaw in my perfect plan. I thought the tuning fork made me invisible. I was wrong. In a universe defined by vibration, the hum of matter, the dance of atoms, the resonance of life, I had just become a perfect, absolute void, a black hole in the fabric of kinetic reality. I wasn't hidden. I was a beacon. To a creature that hunts the slightest tremor, this concentrated point of pure, weaponized nothingness was not a whisper. It was a deafening, soul-shattering roar. I hadn't created silence. I had created its opposite, a sound so profound it had shaken the warden to its very foundations. The shimmering presences converged. The null field projector in my hand began to stutter, the deep thrum in my bones flickering as the immense pressure of the warden pushed against my sanctuary. The shimmering distortions pressed against the edge of my silent bubble, flattening against it. The ghosts of its consumed victims ran among them, swirling against the invisible barrier like frantic faces pressed to a window. The tuning fork wasn't my salvation. It was a dinner bell. And the god of silence had come from every corner of its temple to answer the call. The bubble of stillness collapsed and reformed, each flicker a terrifying spasm. The tuning fork in my grip grew hot, its internal matrix screaming under the strain. Outside my rapidly shrinking sanctuary, the world warped and churned as the warden's legion of presences crushed in. I was at the center of a vortex, the prize in a tug-of-war between my failing artifact and a ravenous god. My triumph had lasted less than 5 minutes. The hubris, the glorious spark of it, was ash in my mouth. All my strategies had been based on one flawed axiom, that silence meant safety. I had tried to beat the warden at its own game, to become more silent, more invisible, more nothing. And in my ultimate success, I had ensured my ultimate failure. Cleverness was a trap. Subtlety was suicide. I was cornered, my back against a wall of my own making. My panicked eyes darted around the hall, searching for an escape that didn't exist. And then I saw it. Through a grand archway to my left, partially obscured by the swirling, shimmering chaos, was the conduit chamber. From the Spire schematic, I knew it was the heart of the structure. A dormant power relay that channeled geothermal and cosmic energy to the temple's long-dead systems. Dominating the room was the main focusing crystal, a shard of pure, translucent quartz the size of a man, humming with a latent power that made the air around it crackle. A new idea took root in the blasted landscape of my mind. It was a wild, suicidal, and utterly insane notion, born not of logic, but of pure, feral defiance. If I couldn't be silent enough, then I would be the opposite. If a whisper was a death sentence, what would a shout be? If the smallest vibration was a lure, what would a cataclysm be? The builders of this place fought the warden with stillness, containing it in a prison of silence. I couldn't maintain the prison, but maybe I could shatter the cage. The decision was an irreversible synaptic flash. No more sneaking, no more hiding, no more playing by the enemy's rules. I was going to make a sound. Not just any sound. I was going to create a wave of such catastrophic, thunderous, and overwhelming vibrational energy that it would either tear the warden apart or bring the entire damn Spire down on top of us. It was a scorched earth policy for a war I had already lost. Annihilation was a preferable alternative to absorption. My own death was an acceptable price for a final, desperate act of rebellion. The tuning fork flickered again, the silent bubble contracting, the crushing cold now seeping through, freezing the sweat on my skin. I looked from the failing device in my hand to the glowing conduit in the distance. The path was clear. I had to abandon my shield, my false hope, and run into the teeth of the storm. My thief's mind, so long bent on stealth and subtlety, recoiled, but the cornered animal within me took over. The plan was simple, brutal, and possibly final. Break the silence. Break it all. My sanctuary was failing, the artifact in my hand little more than a dying ember against a tidal wave of darkness. The time for subtlety was over. Survival now depended on a single, desperate gamble. The conduit chamber was 50 meters away, across the most open, uncluttered, and lethally exposed section of the Spire's grand gallery. 50 meters of perfect, vibration-sensitive flooring between me and my apocalyptic solution. The warden's presences were no longer just pressing, they were coalescing, its myriad shimmers beginning to braid together into a more singular, defined form near the chamber of nullity I just exited. It knew its prey was cornered. With a final, defiant surge of will, I channeled the last dregs of the tuning fork's energy, not into its defensive field, but into a single, focused burst. I didn't know if it was possible, but I had to try. I put every ounce of my strength into my arm and hurled the artifact, my supposed key to salvation, in the opposite direction, down a long, treasure-choked corridor. For a moment, it worked. The fork, now a screaming beacon of null vibration, shot down the hall. In an instant, the coalescing mass of the warden dissolved and surged after it. The pressure on me vanished as the entity, in its entirety, was drawn to the irresistible lure. A silent, shimmering tidal wave roared down the hallway in pursuit of the decoy. I had bought myself seconds. I didn't waste them. I burst from my hiding place. But I couldn't run. The muscle memory screamed at me to sprint, to devour the distance, but my conscious mind knew that would be instant death. I had to cross that open space with the same agonizing slowness that had brought me this far, even as I felt the monster's attention snap back towards me. The first step was torture. I slid my foot forward, the whisper-felt sole barely kissing the obsidian. 10 seconds per inch. The air behind me grew cold again. The decoy hadn't held its attention for long. The second step. I could feel it now. A vast and chilling presence turning, reassessing, realizing its mistake. It was no longer curious. It was no longer learning. It was enraged. A low, resonant pressure began to build in the chamber behind me, a silent roar of fury. The third step. I was halfway across. The open floor felt like a kill zone. I could feel the dust on the floor behind me begin to tremble, not with small ripples, but with a deep, shuddering tremor, as if something of immense size and speed was approaching. It wasn't hiding anymore. Every deliberate, slow-motion extension of my leg was an act of supreme self-control against a hurricane of panic. My breath came in shallow, silent pants. Sweat streamed into my eyes. Don't look back, just keep moving. The conduit chamber's archway was a gateway to heaven or hell, and I didn't care which, as long as it was an end. 20 meters left. The cold at my back was now an Arctic gale. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The warden was no longer a subtle shimmer. It was a roiling vortex of warped space, a churning cyclone of pure void that filled the gallery from floor to ceiling, hurtling towards me. Within its chaos, I saw the tormented, silent screams of its victims, their shapes flashing and contorting. It was an engine of damnation, and it was closing the distance with terrifying speed. I abandoned my slowness. I took one final, lunging, sliding step and threw myself through the archway, crashing onto the floor of the conduit chamber, just as the vortex filled the space where I had been a second before. I hit the floor of the conduit chamber and rolled, scrambling behind the massive pedestal that supported the central focusing crystal. The vortex of the warden poured through the archway behind me, its silent fury a physical force that tore at the very air. The room grew impossibly cold. The low hum of the conduit's latent energy seemed to thin and die in its presence. It had me, pinned in the heart of its prison. Its form, no longer a mere distortion, was finally clear. It was a churning, chaotic mass of everything it had consumed. Writhing within the non-space were the translucent forms of beings I couldn't name, their silent agonies fueling the creature's rage. And there, at the forefront of the maelstrom, was Rin. Not a vague echo this time, but his whole form, translucent and twisted in a permanent, soundless scream, his eyes fixed on me with a look of pure, agonizing betrayal. The monster was wearing my friend's face to mock me in my final moments. There was no time for grief. There was only time for rage. This was it, the final act. I surged to my feet, my back pressed against the cold, humming crystal. My eyes scanned the room for a tool, a weapon, anything. My gaze fell upon a treasure plinth near the wall. On it sat one of the Spire's masterworks, a solid gold idol of one of the builder gods, squat and heavy, its serene face a mask of infuriating calm. It must have weighed 50 kilos. Perfect. With a guttural cry that was finally, blissfully torn from my lungs, I launched myself toward it. The warden surged forward, a tendril of shimmering chaos lashing out. The cold it projected was so intense it cracked the stone floor in its path. It missed me by an inch. I heaved the golden idol off its pedestal, the sheer weight of it nearly tearing my arms from their sockets. I turned, planting my feet. I had one shot. I hoisted the dense golden god, its impassive face reflecting the terrifying chaos of the warden. For a single, eternal second, I met the screaming eyes of the ghost of Rin within the vortex. "I'm sorry," I gasped, the words lost in the silent pressure. And then I threw. With every ounce of adrenaline-fueled strength, with the desperation of a man who had already accepted his own death, I heaved the golden idol into the heart of the great focusing crystal. The impact was not a sound. It was a birth. A point of pure kinetic energy slammed into a matrix designed to channel the power of a planet. The result was instantaneous and absolute. The Spire erupted. A chord of pure divine sound, a note that had not been struck for 10,000 years, blasted out from the shattered crystal. It was a physical wall of vibration, a deafening, multi-layered shriek of pure energy that vibrated my bones into a blur and threw me from my feet. The golden statues in the gallery outside didn't fall, they exploded into dust. The obsidian floors cracked and split, the very stones of the spire screamed. And the warden, the creature born of silence and vacuum, was hit by this tsunami of pure sound. For the first time, it made a noise of its own. It was a horrifying, tearing shriek of static and shredding reality as the impossible wave of energy ripped it apart from the inside out. The vortex unraveled, the tormented souls within it, Rin included, blasted into incandescent motes of light, finally freed. Its silent reign was ended not with a whisper, but with a final, thunderous, world-breaking roar. The spire, its purpose and its prisoner gone, began to die around me. Pain. That was the first thing to return. A sharp, searing agony in my head, my ribs, my everywhere. Then came the sound, a single, high-pitched, unrelenting sine wave ringing in my ears. The ghost of the spire's death cry. The cataclysmic chord had passed, leaving a groaning, wounded silence in its wake. The world was muffled, as if I were underwater. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, a constellation of agony flaring behind my eyes. The conduit chamber was unrecognizable. The great crystal was a crater of smoking, vaporized quartz. The walls were webbed with fissures, and dust, thick as mud, rained down from the collapsing dome above. Outside the archway, the grand gallery was a scene of total devastation. Statues were atomized, treasures crushed under tons of fallen masonry. The spire was tearing itself apart, its ancient bones groaning under stresses they were never meant to bear. The warden was gone, obliterated. I had won. A tremor shook the floor, and a section of the ceiling collapsed nearby, throwing up a fresh cloud of choking debris. Survival, not victory, became the imperative. Crawling was the only form of movement my broken body would allow. I dragged myself forward, my suit torn, my helmet scarred and cracked. A river of warm blood trickled from my hairline down my face, its salty taste a shocking reminder that I was still alive. I crawled past artifacts that I had once risked everything for. A pile of soul diamonds, now just shattered, worthless glass under a fallen beam. The viridian tear, the emerald I'd so carelessly nudged, lay in the rubble, its flawless surface fractured into 1,000 pieces. I felt nothing for them. The lust for wealth, the professional pride, the hubris that had led me here. It had all been cauterized, burned out of me by terror and sound. They were just rocks. Heavy, useless rocks in a falling tomb. Every meter was a struggle. The structure groaned, twisted, and shed its stone skin around me. I crawled over shattered floors, under leaning pillars, through a world of gray dust and failing light. The ringing in my ears was my only companion. I wasn't a master thief anymore. I was an animal, wounded and desperate, crawling back toward the light. Finally, I saw it. The broken arch of the window I had entered through what felt like a lifetime ago. The shimmering sentinel was gone, replaced by a clear, unobstructed view of the alien night sky. With the last of my strength, I pulled my battered body through the opening and collapsed onto the cold stone of the spire's exterior ledge. I didn't have the energy to move further. I lay there, half-deafened and bleeding, and watched my prize, my prison, my tomb, finally surrender. With a final, deep, grinding roar that I felt more than heard, the magnificent needle of the Spire of Qatar buckled at its base. It leaned, hesitated, and then imploded upon itself, collapsing into a volcano of dust and debris that billowed into the silent sky. Then there was stillness. The roar faded. The groaning stopped. Even the ringing in my ears seemed to subside for a moment. In the profound quiet, a new sound emerged. It was ragged, harsh, and desperate. It was the sound of air being clawed into and out of ruined lungs. It was the only treasure I had left. It was my own breathing. Weeks later, the ringing in my ears has subsided to a dull, constant hum, a permanent souvenir. I sit in a tavern in the clamorous heart of Port Nocturne, a city that never sleeps and never stops shouting. The clatter of glasses, the roar of drunken spacers telling lies, the discordant shriek of a synth lute. This cacophony is my new sanctuary. I surround myself with noise. It is a shield, a thick, greasy blanket I pull over my head to keep the other thing at bay. The silence. I took none of the treasure. I crawled away from the Spire's wreckage with nothing but my life, and I feel like I overpaid. The man who entered that Spire is gone, as thoroughly erased as Wren was. In his place is this creature of jumping nerves and quiet panic, a ghost who flinches at his own shadow. The bravado, the arrogance, the simple belief in my own competence, all of it was pulverized along with the focusing crystal. Loud noises are a constant, grating pain against my damaged eardrums, but true quiet is so much worse. A lull in the tavern's roar, a brief moment between songs, is enough to send a jolt of ice-water panic through my veins. In those moments, I can feel it. The pressing weight of the void, the listening stillness. I half expect to see the air shimmer. My hand dives into my pocket, fingers closing around the small, humming device I bought on the black market. It's a simple sonic resonator, emitting a low, constant thrum that only I can hear, a vibration that anchors me to the world of noise and matter. It's my lifeline, my crutch. Without it, I feel myself starting to drift. They say a thief's most valuable assets are his hands. Mine are ruined, not by injury, but by doubt. I stare at my right hand resting on the stained wooden table. It trembles slightly, a tremor that has nothing to do with drink or fatigue. I try to make it stop, but I can't. And then I see it, just for a moment. A flicker at the edge of my vision, so quick I almost convince myself it's a trick of the flickering candlelight. For the briefest fraction of a second, as my fingers twitch, the air around my hand seems to warp, to shimmer, like heat haze off a sterile, silent world. My breath catches in my throat. I snatch my hand back, pulling it close to my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sonic resonator in my pocket feels suddenly, terribly inadequate. I thought the final shattered chord had destroyed Dorwarden. I was wrong. You can't kill a concept. You can't kill silence itself. When the Spire collapsed, when the Warden was torn apart by that glorious, world-breaking sound, its fragments must have scattered like spores on the wind. I didn't just escape. I was splashed. He thought he could steal from a silent god and walk away clean. He thought he could break the silence and pay no price. What a fool he was. The spire is gone. The warden is gone. But a small, terrifying piece of its nature, an echo of its perfect, hungry stillness, now lives inside of me. I carry the silence in my own blood.